Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for joining us on this beautiful spring evening. I know the terraces were tempting, and despite also the strikes making it a bit more challenging to get here than usual. My name is Petrus Kemme, and on behalf of the Vlaams Architectuurinstituut, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening of Tafelzetting number 13. This edition of the exhibition series is made by and dedicated to Aga Batkiewicz, whom I will introduce shortly. For those of you unfamiliar with the series, Tafelzetting is an exhibition series by and for young architects in Flanders and Brussels. It is a co-production between us, the Vlaams Architectuurinstituut, and the Singel Arts Campus. Each year, we invite 4 young practices or designers to display their work or their perspective, as is more so the case tonight. The concept of Tafelzetting is simple yet quite radical. Show your work on the front square of the Singel using a colorful set of 14 tables. The outside location is a challenge to participants to work in a public setting with many layers of context and a multitude of users. It is therefore also a challenge to take position in a public setting, as well as to deal with an unusual lack of control over conditions like the weather, use, and in very rare cases, abuse. The installation the participants use was conceived by the Brussels-based architect Laura Muyldermans. The installation lends itself to be used as urban furniture, as exhibition infrastructure, or any combination of both. The tables, benches, and their attributes are modular and can be arranged in various ways that keep on surprising us. But the table as a figure also has a deeper meaning. It is a quintessential symbol of a place to meet, to discuss, to find a common ground, but also a place to think, to write, to draw. Each table setting, therefore, is both an exchange of ideas, but also a statement of sorts. Thus far, 12 architects, no, I'm mistaken, no, I'm right, 13 actually, architects have participated in Tafelzetting. And flipping through their installations quickly, first we have Laura Muyldermans, who designed the tables. Then it was Generiek, Joris Kermans, Sophia Holst, Maxime Prananto, Safir, Studio Bravo, Studio Ruben Castro, Platform Architectuur, Fijn Architectuuratelier, He Architectuur, Graft, and finally Studio Lauka, an installation we dismantled just last week. And now, tonight, it's the turn of Aga. Aga is a Polish architect who lives and works in Ghent. She's a collaborator at Nu Architectuuratelier and teaches at St. Lucas KU Leuven. In addition, she works under her own name, but mainly in collaboration with an international network of befriended makers. Recurring themes in her work are interfaces between man-made and natural environments, architecture and graphic representation, and attention to often forgotten spaces and users. She reads space not only as a physical construction, but also as a carrier of stories, history, and changing relationships. In Tafelzetting 13, Aga focuses her particular gaze at the immediate surroundings of the exhibition space of the Singel. Using the table as a supporting structure, she made a reconstruction of islands, as she calls them, in the landscape by the Antwerp Ring Road. To this end, she brings together various media and materials, such as samples of forgotten elements from the environment and photography by Jason Ladrigan. The result is her own particular interpretation of the ring landscape, in which she draws attention to forgotten places, stories, and their characters. After my introduction, Aga will first introduce herself and her work a bit further, and taking along her Tafelzetting as part of that. And after that, I will join her along with Jason to explore a bit further the content of this particular Tafelzetting. And afterwards, of course, we hope you join us at the installation in the front of the Singel to see it for yourselves in detail and have a drink at the bar. Before I leave the words to Aga, however, there's some people I would like to thank. First of all, the Singel for the collaboration, the continued collaboration on this exhibition series. In particular, I want to thank Guy Antoni for yet another beautifully executed installation. my colleagues at the Vlaams Architectuurinstituut and our director, Dennis, for their input and their support. In particular, Eva Pot also for leading yet another production to a very good end. Then I also would like to thank Sophie van Aalbroek for the detailing of the banners, Jona van Eetvelde of Huismus for his carpentry skills, Jason Ladrigan for his keen eye and beautiful images, and last but not least, Aga for accepting this invitation, but also this challenge. It has been a pleasure to rediscover a context which I'm perhaps a bit too familiar with through your eyes, and in doing so, to learn more about your way of seeing as well. Thank you. With that, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Petrus. Thank you, everyone, for coming. As Petrus already introduced me, I would like to reintroduce myself, and I will do so by presenting to you two of my favorite books, both by the Polish authors. The first one being The Tale of the Serpent's Heart by Radek Rak, and the second one titled Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. I will shortly explain what the books are about. The Radek Rak's story follows Jakub Szela, who's a young peasant boy who embarks on a fantastical journey after losing his heart metaphorically and literally. And his quest through the lands lead him through a world that is steeped in Slavic folklore and mythology, where he encounters witches, talking animals, and eventually the king of the serpent. The other book by Olga Tokarczuk follows an eccentric woman who lives in a remote Polish village and who becomes obsessed with a string of mysterious murders that she believes are being committed by animals as a revenge to human cruelty. Both of these books explore the tension between the human and the non-human worlds, and both weave together mythology and dark storytelling into a fascinating narrative. The animals and nature, they are not just background elements, but a foreground focus that possesses agency, that often communicates and guides people through their journeys. And by doing so, they blur the line between what is human and non-human. More so, both of these stories have a particular setting. Their story unfolds in the landscape of the southern fringes of Poland, where I originate from, where I come from. By setting the story in this beautiful landscape, they echo the cultural and geographical identity of this place, being the steep slopes, the ancient forests, and the traces of pagan and pre-Christian knowledge. And I always like to think that this condition of living in a mountain valley, where I'm from, is something that triggers curiosity and an urge to understand what lies beyond the horizon. Storytelling in the mountains is used as a way to make sense of the unknown and to bridge the visible world with the imagined one. And for myself, the mountains offer also a rich tapestry of a layered context in which I like operating, I like working, and that has informed several of the projects that I've been recently working on. I won't talk about these projects though tonight, but I'd like to introduce you to three of my projects that I've been working on alone and in collaborations, and the Tafelzetting at the very end that kind of concludes or summarizes my attempt of seeing and working on the project. The first project I'd like to introduce you to is Tango at 16 square meters. And the project will explain how I look at the spaces as carriers of stories, histories, and evolving relationships. Tango was an exhibition that has been designed and curated by me in collaboration with Xander van Dijk and Veronica Meyer, my dear friends, for Zachęta National Gallery in Warsaw. Guided by Zbigniew Rybczyński's short film Tango, we looked at the intensity of living. In the video that Rybczyński produced, dozens of characters enter and exit a small space, and they loop in a synchronized choreography, gradually filling the room with a dense and wordless dance that reveals a layered complexity of life. The film's creation involved the production of thousands of drawn frames, and by this, Rybczyński managed to script the choreography on a small space of a single room. In a similar manner, a modern project attempted to choreograph our daily routines within the tight frame of domestic architecture, using spatial sequencing and repetition to reveal patterns in the way we move, interact, and inhabit the space. So here you can see an example of the Frankfurter kitchen drawn by Margaret Schutte-Liszocki in 1920s. Housing construction and interiors from the Polish People's Republic were a point of departure for our investigation into the dependency between politics and architecture. We looked at how changing political landscape, economical situation, and the normatives influenced the living condition of people at the time. Interior magazines became sources of historical knowledge on one hand, presenting spatial solutions by both users and planners. And on the other hand, they were a projection of sort of fantasies that were dreamt in the time of an utmost scarcity of means and space. Meblościanka, a wall unit, a multifunctional furniture, was government's attempt to solve the housing crisis and living situation in the cramped spaces of Polish apartments. It was originally designed by couple, Czesław and Bogusława Kowalscy, and was mass-produced and distributed to equip apartment blocks all over Poland. As you can see on the attached series of photographs, it continues to shape the landscape of Polish apartments, as it can be witnessed by this photo essay by Wojtek Woźniak, The Living Room. In the exhibition, the monumental Meblościanka took a central role as an object that the audience could interact with. It was presented as a skeleton, stripped of its veneer dress, and a cheap board, which is still a favorite material for production of inexpensive furniture. The back wall of Meblościanka hosted an archive of material from the time of Polish People's Republic, including spatial solutions, projects, videos, as images sourced from popular magazines and models. Tango did not stop for us with the end of the Polish People's Republic. The exhibition aimed at opening up a contemporary discourse and putting a finding into a global perspective. A present-day situation was portrayed by photographer Jakub Certowicz in his photo essay Mikroapartamenty, where Jakub depicted the way young people nowadays live on a limited space of apartments in a newly constructed housing block in Wrocław. The second project I'd like to present today is Moorhal, where I'd like to discuss how the site conditions are often a point of departure for the design assignment that I take. The project was realized by invitation of Aidan Conway in collaboration with Gosia Neumann, who's actually sitting here in the audience today as well. The project assignment was to secure and renovate a walled garden at the Moorhal estate in Ireland, for those who don't know. There at the northern shores of the lake Cara, George Moore established an estate at the end of the 19th century, and right next to it, a walled garden was constructed. The house was burned down during the 1923 Irish Civil War, leaving the estate and the gardens in ruins. A few years back from now, the county mayor bought the premise with a wish to restore the premises. We used the typology of temenos to think of the site plan for this location. So maybe shortly about the temenos, what it is for us. It originates from an ancient sacred space, and it describes a space set apart from the rest of the world, enclosed with a wall and mostly accessed by one gate, often dedicated to rituals, reflections. And this wall clearly demarcates the space from the outside, making you feel like you enter a different kind of world when you're inside. In the first phase of the project, a detailed survey was conducted describing the condition of the wall as we found it. And we decided to focus on restoring 3 of its main gates, the one to the north, east and west, leaving the other parts of the wall ruinated. What we proposed was a set of interventions. A set of interventions on the premises of the wall that enclosed the wall itself, allowing for interacting with the space by looking inwards but not crossing it directly. A number of follies was also proposed and scattered across the garden that included the greenhouse, a tower, a platform, a small pavilion for public gathering, and an and a small tribune. The planting of the garden was done in collaboration with Jan Mine from Brussels. So here you see the example of the gate on the right side. And on the left side, an intervention on the wall, which is a separate structure that allows for peeking through to the inside of the garden. This is the recent, from already a few years back, view after the garden has been cleaned up and the first paths have been laid out. Extractive Landscapes is a studio that I've been teaching at KU Leuven last semester. And by presenting this project, I'd like to discuss how drawing can become a narrating tool. But before I get to the project itself, let me shortly introduce my work that I'm currently conducting, working with Nu Architectuuratelier already for the last 2 years, I think, on this project. Noord-Zuid-Verbinding is a project that Nu is working on in collaboration with a number of offices, MAT Ontwerpers, 51 and 4E, Arcadis and larger collaborators, and it's a massive infrastructural project that seeks to re-envision the connection between Hasselt and Eindhoven. We as architects, we like to see the roads more than as a 2-dimensional element. We like to see it as a 3-dimensional spatial object that engages with its surrounding and interacts with it. Together with Nu, we are working on a number of kunstwerken. These are the bridges, the animal crossings, walls, with an ambition to maximize the sustainable approach towards the project, minimize the use of concrete, maximize the use of wood, and propose solutions that allow animal and nature habitation. Fascinated by the context of the road itself, I continued investigating the area, and I've drafted a proposal for a studio that was then developed for the master studios within the studio at KU Leuven in Ghent. The studio explored the present and past terraformative practices that are taking place in Kempen region, in the basin in Belgian Limburg. Together with the students, we question how man-made extraction landscapes, whether currently operatable or abandoned, continue to influence the conditions of the soil and the communities that live within that soil. The early days of Industrial Revolution brought mining operations to the region, along with the growth of communities, rapid urbanization, development of roads, towns, that forever altered the pre-existing landscape. Interesting photograph you can see on the right side. It's where these two realities collide, the reality of mining and the reality of rapid development and urbanization. It's protest of miners on the road that leads through Hout, haar, and Helchteren, protesting the closure of the mine itself. The development of the Grote Baan, stretching from Hasselt to the border with the Netherlands, cut through the heart of the town, dissecting it with two. To understand these varying realities, together with the students, we followed the section that ran horizontally from west to east and crossed various realities, starting from mining plateau on the very west side of the Grote Baan, of the big road, through the road itself to the neighborhoods of the communities at Siete-Meulenberg and down to the nature reserve at Brellarheide. The students were encouraged to draw geological sections, and through these sections speculate on the past and the presence of the area that they are operating within. The garden city Meulenberg was designed to facilitate the growing population, and today stages complex social dynamics that of the descendants of the mining community. We've traced these dynamics and tried to rewrite them in narratives and drawings to subtly register the informality that occurs in the public space at the moment. The result of this endeavor was 12 projects for the public space for the area of Hout, haar, and Helchteren, where the students try to respond to the programmatic needs of the community with the intention of recycling and reusing material found on the site. And now I'd like to talk about tafelzetting. That kind of concludes and summarizes my further ways of looking at design assignment. The project was done in collaboration with Jason Ladrigan. I should probably mention it already. So for the tafelzetting, I took the opportunity to once again look at the overlooked landscapes, these liminal areas alongside large infrastructure, and at this time in the context of the Singel. Together with Jason, we looked at what we call islands. These are these pockets of green, but not so green in nature, but not so nature, that are the result of the dissecting operations of infrastructure. We wandered along the Antwerp's ring road back and forth, seeking to record the landscape not as a fixed condition, but as something in flux, a terrain that is continuously reconfigured by time and human intervention. This changing setting for us, therefore, is an attempt to create a visual and spatial record documenting these landscapes in transition. I find it interesting how the theme of changing setting reoccurs in both storytelling as characters transition from one place to another, but also in architecture of reconfiguration of spatial, material, and contextual conditions. For me, particularly in this exhibition, changing setting has actually a triple meaning. On one hand, it refers to a physical transformation of actual urban landscapes, temporary, unfinished, continuously reshaped. On the other hand, it has to do with shifting perceptions, the ways we look at this landscape, sometimes seeing them as devalued and sometimes accrediting a lot of value to what they are. Actually, thirdly, there is also quite a broader global perspective that has to do with changing climates that the urbanized areas particularly suffer from, so with the rising temperatures actually. This changing setting in the city itself is very much visible. The present and the origin of the Singel directly links to this temporal character of the landscape around the ring. Maybe shortly about the history of the Singel then. In 1958, the Flemish Ministry of Public Works and Reconstruction assigned architect Leon Steinen to design a new building for the Royal Flemish Music Conservatory. And Steinen chose the location himself. It was a sandy and hilly area on the edge of the city, shaped by the remains of the 19th century fortress. He was charmed by the area and developed a plan to transform it into a model neighborhood based on his modernist vision, featuring 6 high-rise buildings with the conservatory at its heart. When Steinen was drawing up his plan for this architecture, the highway had been designed to be 3 kilometers south from the premises of the city. The project was conceived as a unity of the building and its context. Lifting the structure on pilotes allowed the landscape to flow underneath it into the two generous courtyards. The vistas opened up from the hallways and from the classrooms, and a large staircase and the platform descended down into the water. During the permit works, the E3 motorway plan was revised, moving the road closer to Steinen's site. Shortly after, a railway was also planned to run along it. And as the architect put it, the ink on the first drawings was not yet dry when my suffering began. So he clearly lamented the lost landscape and the lost context for his building. As a result of infrastructural cuts, Wezenberg area evolved into a collection of islands, accessed and segregated by infrastructure, held together only by the gaze from a distance. This temporal character of the islands invites projections, a kind of openness that planners rush to fill. Over the years, various visions have been formulated, each one offering a new interpretation of what the infrastructural landscape around the Antwerpse ring could be. These proposals aim to shape the future of the area, whether through introduction of green corridors, sustainable urban spaces, or new infrastructural connections. We see now that the landscape is shifting once again. The question is, how can we see it for what it is? Not as a finished form, but as something in motion. How does this shifting context, the changing context, change the experience of the building itself, and vice versa? Is there a value in these orphaned lots? Who resides within them? In order to change settings, one has to change the perspective of looking at that. We need to look towards the building and away from it, recording a larger perspective, but also focus on smaller details. We need to alter between the larger overview, like the villains standing around the maquette at Fort Knox, at the Goldfinger movie, but also hide inside of the model like James Bond did. And we need to involve and get engaged with the landscape on the tectonic level. The installation I propose is an on-site scale model of sort, as subjective interpretation of the surrounding of the Singel on the edge of Antwerp. And my focus was on 3 particular locations, each one distinctive in its character, but all born from the same infrastructural operations. One being the Mastfest. It's the last remain of the former historical fortification landscape that was kind of held in its current state thanks to the 1930s World Expo that happened on that side of the city. The second one being Wezenberg. It's a piece of forgotten land, a large hill that actually has been created by terraforming operations during the construction of the Singel itself and the swimming pool to the other side. And the Pompark Zout, a large stretch of green actually that is feeling a little bit orphaned, with a big administrative building that is currently used as a homeless shelter in the middle, that currently is going a heavy lifting due to the renovation of the park into a new, what it's to become a new Pomparkzuid. My installation is, as Petrus already mentioned, a model of some sort, consisting of 5 islands and 3 of them pointing to these actual locations in the geographical context. The table on top is cut in a way to resemble the shape of the islands themselves. In Jason's photographs, the buildings along the Antwerp's ring appear as points of reference in the background on the edge of the frames. And these images capture the space under constant transformation. Some of these spaces are devalued for some, and for others, they actually are vessels of many stories. Part of the project was an attempt to capture the stories through conversations with the passers-by, through looking at the soil and understanding its composition, and through finding remains of very peculiar details in public space. The result of this work is not a static or a definitive record, but an evolving archive of spaces and stories, reflecting the dynamic and unfinished nature of both the urban landscape and our perception of it. And with that, I invite you to come and visit the installation with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Aga, for this introduction. It's nice. Thank you, Jason, also for joining us. I think in introducing your projects, perhaps people can see why I invited you to display your perspective rather than to put on a portfolio exhibition, for instance. So we discussed from the very beginning, like to put forward your way of looking through the case of the Singel, of the exhibition location. Now that you have kind of finished this project, how would you summarize this way of looking? What is the core of it?
I think it's, sorry, does it work? I think it's what I was trying to depict through the examples of the previous projects that I already worked on. My way of looking focuses on building narratives. It's something that is very important for me to understand what is the story behind the project, and to construct the story partially on my own, to fill in the gaps that I cannot really fill in by doing the research itself. And I often also depart from looking at the context very closely, and that means not only studying the context through books and literature, but also being there and trying to grasp what the reality surrounding me is about.
Yeah. And there clearly is some kind of subjectivity or some kind of your perspective is very present, of course, in this reading. And we see also like recurrent themes from the projects you showed before the table setting. Did the context of the Singel mostly trigger fascinations that you were already working on, or were there also things specific to this context that you kind of latched onto?
It primarily triggered fascinations that I already had been working on, actually. Luckily enough, I've been involved in the project with NU that has to do actually with infrastructure, and that made me open my eyes to what this space along the road is about and could be about, what these landscape are and who are they valuable for, actually. So coming here to the Singel, I somewhat from the beginning we had a conversation that this wouldn't be a portfolio exhibition, but instantly almost the immediate context and the immediate surrounding of the Singel was something that I saw myself working with. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I could only expand what I've been previously working on.
Another recurring theme is collaboration. I mean, it's I think it has been true for I think remarkably for a lot of the previous also participants in table setting. I think it's also very much part of a generation, it seems, to really look for collaborations or opportunities to collaborate. But as we have seen, yeah, you work in various constellations in a museum context, in large infrastructure projects with New Architectuuratelier, in teaching and so on. Maybe it's a good opportunity to briefly introduce Jason, but also other collaborators that you invited to work on this project with.
Yes, Jason sitting here with me. There's Sophie, who was involved in stitching the textiles. And with Jonna, the carpenter, we collaborated together on building up the exhibition itself. It's true that working with other people is extremely important for me. I find architectural projects a complex endeavor, too complex for a single person to fully understand it or to hold it. Moreover, actually, I find very interesting where other perspectives are brought into the project. In that sense, for example, I feel like Jason's perspective or even Sophie's perspective and discussion with how the table would be eventually built, they only enriched my seeing of the project itself. So in that sense, yeah, I find it very fruitful also for myself to learn from others and to further expand on what my initial ideas are.
So that brings us to you, Jason. What was at the time the brief that you got from Aga, or the question that you got, as you remember it?
I'm holding it correctly. Yeah. There was actually no real brief. I know Aga quite well, so we kind of share quite some similar interests. And I think it just started with some conversations about her ambitions for the project, the stories she was kind of searching for and kind of understanding the context. And then it led to a moment of, me kind of maybe discovering some of the stories with her, and then me purely just taking a view on these and capturing it through some images. So there was no strict to-do list or output. It was kind of me trying to understand the stories with Aga and what she's researching and just kind of capturing these moments of it. So.
I also found it quite interesting with how we embarked on these long walks, actually. That was really quite important for me also to understand what this space is about, and being there with Jason was extremely helpful also because we could immediately bounce our reflection one of another.
And then, yeah, the end results, the installation that we are opening tonight is, has been mentioned a few times now. It's kind of a representation of the surroundings, but not in a very literal sense, although there are quite literal elements and that you take over. How did you kind of navigate this question of at once representing something, but also taking the liberty to kind of play with certain aspects, or to play up, or to focus? How did you play with these parameters?
Surely there had to be a level of abstraction when it comes to designing this exhibition, and the limitation comes from the use of the modular element that we are all given to build with, so the table itself. But this level of abstraction, I think, was also in my favor in some way. I like when the audience themselves can guess what they are looking at with few hints that maybe I'm giving, or that the architect or artist or curator sometimes are also providing. So in a way, abstraction allows to fill in the gaps for someone else with their own ideas.
Then maybe zooming in briefly on like the three islands that you mentioned. I'm coming to you first, Jason, because you're an architect as well as a photographer, but mostly from a photographic point of view. I'm thinking of the Pompark Zuid in particular, with all these earthworks, as Aga introduced, going on at this very moment. What struck you there as a photographer?
Yeah, the Pompark is it's really like this collage in some way. There's so many layers to it. I found when you look at it from a bit of a distance, just by traveling around it, you really have this big urban scale. You have the other tower from Leon Steinen. You have the housing towers. You see Antwerp Zuid in the background, the edge of the city, all of the infrastructure layers. There's so much movement. But actually, when we then went for a walk and you really walk on it, there's already a lot of layers again. You have the dog park, which has kind of these people doing the endless loops around it. You have all these different moments of the trees and vegetation. And again, you find a lot of people's presence in these. You have the pump park itself and all this technical side where you have these hills, almost like mountains. And in some way, these were really nice because on kind of several visits, every time they were changing. So it was kind of, these were really like a nice reflection of what is going on in these areas. It's constantly changing over and over. And you also then have this, the other tower building, which has kind of some regional housing. But for me, this was also a wonderful place. The moment you step off the road and walk around it, it's this beautiful little architectural piece with beautiful staircases and everything. And then you've got one final layer of the vegetation or the trees, which has this big pathway across it, the shortest way. So for me, it was just this kind of endless world of layers to try and take photos of. But always, as Aga mentioned in her presentation, there's always a presence of the bigger architecture in the background.
Then Aga, the Masfest, perhaps it's the most traditional in its current use green space in a sense, but still, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Maybe you can explain a bit further what actually these layers are that you found fascinating in this island.
I think you're right to say Masfest seem maybe the most traditional, and as it is actually a park that is quite defined. But also feels extremely suspended or heterotopian to some extent, maybe because of its undulating character. So it really feels like a sunken niche, tucked away from the gaze of the road itself and the people from around. Actually, I met a girl there who said that you really have to know that it's there if you really want to find it. And you would imagine that it's something that is very sedimented as a project, that it's not transforming anymore, but just recently a youth center that was standing there and has been used in an informal way has been demolished. So you can still, that there's still a lot of pressure on this terrain and what it might become and what it will become.
And then finally, we have the Wezenberg, the smallest, but also perhaps the most secluded. I must admit, as someone who works here but also lives not too far away from it, it's one of these places that you walk by thousands of times, but you have no idea what is actually going on in there. What did you actually find there?
Yeah, for me, this is actually, it's very secluded in some way. Aga explained where it came from. The kind of, as the infrastructure and the architecture is built, the leftover earth, so it's in some way temporary, but it's actually like this little oasis in some way. You really pass by it, everybody's passing by, but we took the adventure to walk up it. And it was actually, it's like a ridgeline of a mountain in some way. You're really passing through the trees, and then you come across this seating area. Of course, there's presence of people using it in many ways. But what was really beautiful about it is that you're suddenly observing the city in some way, while as in this part of the city, you're really constantly observed with the buildings and the infrastructure and passing by constantly. So you really felt secluded, but in some way included, especially if you sit and look at the Singel as all of the teaching, the music school, and maybe the people can see you, maybe not, but so you feel isolated but included. And yeah, it's a really, really nice little place in that way. And then nature also has a really nice presence. It was a temporary hill in some way, but you can really feel nature came back. And then you have a really beautiful connection in the park across the street. So it's like, yeah, really nature keeps its presence. And
I think kind of a recurring theme between all of them is also this kind of unorganized use that's actually the most use that you see, and that is also present in the images and in the installation, is kind of these traces of use that is not invited or not that it was not designed for, but where there is an apparent need also for these secluded spaces, these unorganized, in a sense, spaces. I think you put it somewhere, Aga, particularly for the Wezenberg, that the people that go there, you kind of project they might go there not to be seen, actually. Is that something that you saw in many of these spaces?
We saw them in many of the spaces, and we also picked up from the conversations with passerbys. And it's true, like someone mentioned, it's a popular dating place late in the night, and it's for those people who prefer to remain in the shadow that they meet there. And if these places, well, I understand that they are kind of marginalized and unwanted for many of the city users, but if they are gone, that means that certain use is also pushed out further away. I don't know where yet again.
Well, maybe finally the opening up again a bit. You've now produced this installation, this kind of perspective on the surrounding, but also kind of a projection of your way of looking. What do you actually hope people take away from this installation, or read into it, or take home with them in a sense?
In some way, like maybe firstly, because I imagine this installation in some way as a non-static element. So it has plantation on it. It will grow over time. The table is made out of cork. I'm imagining to transform, but then yet again, what I think what we try to do is to capture a particular moment in time with the photography essay, because these landscapes are under constant transformation, and Pompark Zuid is already different than what it was when we photographed it in March, completely changed, and within the next few months the space will be, well, I don't want to say gentrified, but just different, something different, and different people will use it in a different manner. So I think I wanted to like record this one moment in time, and I want people to take that with them.
Yeah, I think it also, I don't know, I hope, for me personally, I also hope it kind of creates an awareness of actually these changes going on, because I think a lot of the time they just go on in the background, and even today, it happened to be a sunny day today, while where you were taking the photographs, it was a bit more cloudy and misty still a few weeks ago. So there already in this contrast of conditions, indeed, you see like the change, the change in conditions on a very, very direct level. Jason, maybe coming back to you, you work as an architect as well as a photographer. How does this work with Aga kind of relate to your overall work as a architect/photographer?
Yeah, I work predominantly as an architect, and photography is something I've done for quite a long time, just on the side. But what I found with the photography, for example, it's like Aga just said, it's always just kind of making these, you're just capturing a moment, and when you see it again, it allows you just to go back to that moment and to start to think of what's literally outside of that photo, what's going on. And in some way, that's kind of what this experience was again, looking more at context though. My interest in architecture, it's a lot about craft and the spaces we make, but I think now looking more at context, it's also a really, really wonderful thing to have done, to more put the architecture secondary, and again to just capture these moments. As you said, the weather changes. The last image Aga had showed on the highway, I was standing there for a long time, and just one moment that there's no cars there, but there was just traffic jams here, and it was really just a simple moment, but it's purely when you look at it this way, it just opens up a new kind of imagination and stuff. So yeah, for me, it's this experience of taking the images is it's a wonderful way just to think about things, reflect on things, think going forward, and yeah. So understanding context has been a wonderful outcome from it.
All right. Aga, final question is for you. You have introduced table setting, this table setting kind of as an occasion to bring some things together, or some themes together, and and you've told us about your work with New Architectuurinstituut. It's a huge infrastructural project, so I can imagine it will keep you busy for some time still. But are there like other narratives or stories or spaces that you are thinking about working on in the future?
Well, now I'm going on holiday.
Okay.
But after I come back, I think I will stay in the theme of working with soil and ground for a while, but I think the next project that is kind of coming up is looking at the ground and at the sky at the same time, more cosmological themes. I don't know if you've seen the film Nostalgia for the Light.
No.
Well, it's a beautiful documentary where astronomers from observatory in Atacama Desert meet archaeologists there. A similar project might be cooking up, but in Belgium, on its fringes, on the corner with Germany. So looking a bit towards the sky and down on the ground.
looking forward already. Then I want to say a final thank you for collaborating on this project. You as well, Jason. I think we are very happy, and as I said, surprised each time how the tables can produce something new or can host a new perspective. Also on this side of the Singel, we have the tradition at table setting not to do questions at the end of the conversation, because we have the installation outside with a bar right next to it. So we think it's a better setting to ask your questions directly to Aga and Jason. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you join us outside.
Thank you. Can I also say thank you?
If you insist.
I also just want to say thank you. And first of all, thank you to VAI for inviting me. It was a really exciting and fantastic collaboration. And super many thanks to you, Petrus and Eva, for following up on the production, but also to Jason and Sophie and Diana, who were along with me on the road and on the process, and to Ula and Johannes for helping me dig out some plans. And to my colleagues and Xander, who supported me on the content and discussions. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot.